Good evening, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. We met with one of our subscribers who stopped by to say hello, came over to Bohol to have a little visit and to meet some of the expats over here, of whom we are too. Well, there's a video out showing Adrian and hearing him about his life and his views, so there's no need for me to go over that. But what prompts me to make this video, along with the drive home, which was today, was in the dark, is that if you're coming over here as even as a visitor who is likely to be driving, you really need to be aware of conditions here and just how different they are to conditions at home, wherever that home is, because all of those things that you take for granted in your home country, just don't exist here. Beth and I went into Taliban today after we'd done our little help tour at the Village of Hope, and even we, with all our experience of driving in the Philippines, were astonished when we got to the crossroads into Taliban, where sitting there waiting for his turn to break into the traffic going into Taliban was a boy on a motorcycle who must have been all of 7 or 8 years old. You might not believe this, but he is sitting there on a scooter style motorcycle, which are very common here. And what possible experience could he have? Well, of course it would be extremely limited, to say the least. Now here's the difference. When you drive out here, you're not driving in an educated or shall we say a trained traffic force of traffic, because there is very little in the way of, certainly on the province, on the provincial parts, on the island of Bohol as we're living, there's very little in the way of training, certainly in Taliban. So what does this mean in real terms for anybody that's coming over here and driving? Well, things like right of way are really all they're all shaken up and tipped about and reversed. My experience is that the rule, now this is the thing, is there are rules, but they're just not the same. They're not the same as where you came from. So instead of having traffic laws which are enforced and adhered to, maybe not in that order, you don't have that. Traffic coming from the right on the national highway, the national highway runs right around, and it runs in our particular case, let's say from Taliban, we have the national highway runs to Tagbilaran. Now it's a busy road now, and it has two different purposes. One is to get traffic from one town to another, from Taliban, to go through the various different Clarin, Inabanga, Tubigon, to go through all of these towns. But in between even those towns is rural life. And what rural life means is exactly what we were just talking about there, about a boy of 7, 8, 9, 10 years old driving a motorcycle. Well, obviously he hasn't got a license, but then even if he was 27, he probably wouldn't have a license. Now, when I was in San Fernando, I went to the trouble of going and having the test and getting my driver's license. So I am completely legal to drive, and we had the benefits of this reinforced to us when we had occasion a little while ago to go into the local police station in Dubai, and right at that time, and I've mentioned this before, right at that time we were in the little red truck, and it was one day we hadn't got in to do the registration the day before, and so we were one day out of the registration. And when we showed our papers to the cop there, and the cop very kindly said I'd go in and get your registration tomorrow. Why is that? Nobody ever bothers about this, we're saying. I didn't think that anybody bothered about that. And he said, well, it's for a very good reason. Everything is fine as long as it's fine. And then the moment it's not fine, boy, it goes down the toilet very, very fast. And he's talking to Beth, says, and as your husband is a foreigner, if everything is not correct, if everything is not as per the law on your driving, in other words, registration and insurance, which of course we have, said, if it's not correct, then and anybody is hurt in the accident, things can go very badly for your husband. Now we've seen accidents, not surprisingly few considering the wild driving that we also see and are about to comment on right now. We've seen remarkably few accidents, but we have seen them where, in one particular case, a guy that had done a U-turn, and as we found out later, not strictly speaking not his fault, because the motorcyclist that he had seen at a distance, who, had he been travelling at a reasonable speed, would never have been able to get to him before he completed his U-turn, hit the vehicle that he was driving. And he ended up, even though that boy that was driving was not supposed to be on a motorcycle yet, was not eligible to hold a license or to take a test. He was something like 13 or 14 years old. He got hurt, and the man that I'm talking about ended up paying quite a bit of money towards this boy's hospital bills. So, as we said, if anything goes wrong and your paperwork is not in line, then you can be in trouble. Now, how else can you be in trouble? If you're going along the national highway, which in Bohol it's very difficult to go anywhere without being on the national highway, because all roads that lead off go to the various barangays, and that's where the problem comes in, is that you have ordinary, local, very local in both the physical and in the mental and in the thinking. That's how people who live in those little localities which span the national highway, now they think in a very local way, but the people that are travelling, especially in trucks, 8 and 10 wheelers travelling in trucks along the national highway, plus the vans, who we've often said are like suicide drivers, they are not thinking locally, they're driving on through. But the people who live there think very locally. So when a kid gets onto a bike and just pops across the road to a sari store and back again for cigarettes for his dad, he's not thinking about doing a great journey, he's just popping out. And so things like lights really don't come into it. Now, how does that affect you? Boy, as a driver, as the safest of drivers, you could be driving along the road, get stuck in your, say you have an ordinary Western style vehicle, you can get stuck behind a tricycle driver who is doing 20 miles an hour, and you have slowed down in your big picture journey between, say, Taliban and Tagbilaran, where you want to get there in less than 3 hours, and you'll need to overtake him. And we're talking about after dark now, of course. Now, what are the dangers in that? Well, if you were in a Western country with everything being civilized and educated, you would simply have to allow for the fact that oncoming lights were far enough away for you to be able to overtake and be back safely on the correct side of the road. Now, in the Philippines, especially in the province, you can have all kinds of situations where it's not going to be safe to be on the other side of the road, even for that moment of just overtaking, because a vehicle, tricycle, a bike, a bicycle, even a car, but less likely with a car, but certainly a motorcycle may be approaching on his correct side of the road but with no lights on. And as the highway itself is not lit, it is in complete darkness. And that's a shock to the system to suddenly find that there you are, abreast of the vehicle you're overtaking, and with a bike or motorcycle or tricycle coming towards you with no lights on, which is only revealed when it comes within the span of your own lights. So it's very risky. Now, what's the other dangers is that people are not educated by the media to walk on the side of the road that opposes the traffic. Now, the benefits of doing that is that if you are caught up in what I often think of as a perfect storm, and that is another vehicle overtaking the vehicle that is approaching you, you can actually see what's happening and you can get off the road. Now, that's the other thing. People walk on the road at night, not in light clothing like we are as expats are taught to do. No, they don't do that. They walk on the side of the road, which is most convenient, which, funnily enough, it seems to be most of the time that they are walking with their back to the traffic. So they're walking away from their oncoming traffic, and they don't know, they can't see what's coming. They see the lights, but they don't know how close they are. The perfect storm, as I call it, is when you are driving along and you are on the correct side of the road doing a reasonable speed, not speeding, in other words, you're behaving perfectly sensibly, and a truck coming the other way may not have its lights dipped. So there's that moment when the blaze of headlights are literally here, just yards away from you, and you're going into a black hole because your lights will not be sufficient to allow you to see into that gap which is your side of the road. Now, all it needs for a terrible catastrophe to happen is that someone will be walking away from you on your side of the road. Or you might have another phenomena here, which is that people in their local barangay might be gathering, it might be a little gathering of kids, they sit with their butt to the back to the road, and their butt on the white line that is the edge of the road. Now, if you get one person like that going into the black hole, truck on the other side with its headlights blaring, that would be very, very tricky situation, because the roads here, certainly on Bohol, are two-lane, one going one way, one going the other. So it really is tricky. So add to that, and I'm not trying to over dramatize this is a reality. Add to that dogs and goats, which are untended and unsupervised, and the occasional pig, and yes, not just the ones that are driving, and the lack of lights on. I would say, some subscriber can correct me on this. I think that they will correct me and tell me that I didn't allow enough, but I reckon 40% of the motorcycles and possibly tricycles do not have any lights. They're going along in the dark, totally without lights. Now here's another strange thing that happens here. If a motorcycle is approaching on the other side, and you with your headlights on, your heads on bright, and out of courtesy you dip your lights, right? So you dim your headlights. He, in response, if he is one of those rare breed who has lights on his bike, he will turn his headlight out completely. I cannot understand why they do that, but that is their way of dipping their headlights. So a complete lack of road training, road sense, and you have this apparent contradiction of highly skilled drivers who have been riding motorcycles practically all their lives, because they have ridden on the gas tank of their dad's motorcycle for as long as they could sit up properly and hold on to that stabilizer bar that's across the handlebars. And they're very skillful at handling the machine itself, but they don't have any training about road sense, and so it's completely absent. And that's why most expats, certainly in the province, have a rule that they do not drive after dark, and for all of the reasons that I've mentioned, because it's very unlikely that whoever you were unfortunate enough to hit, it's very unlikely, okay, I'm coming home, that they have insurance. Okay,
Come on, baby.
that's all.
Inside.
Gotta go to dinner. Bye for now.